My son wanted to play on the starting team, and I had to ask the coach for a favor. He agreed, but only under one condition. My name is Natalie. I'm 39, married, mother of one, and every decision I've made in the past 6 months has been about keeping my son from quitting everything he loves. Daniel is 16. Talented, yes, but lately distant. He used to love soccer. Ate, breathed, slept it. Then something changed. Maybe it was pressure. Maybe it was hormones. Maybe it was the fear of not being enough. I saw the shift before anyone else, but I didn't know how to fix it. So I did what any mother would do. I stepped in. Coach Blake was the new guy. Younger than most coaches. Mid-40s, tall, tan, ex-military. The kind of man who could get a group of restless teenage boys to listen just by raising his eyebrow. He'd only been with the team for 3 months, but already, the parents were divided. Some found him too harsh. Others respected his discipline. I just noticed how my son responded to him. Fear, admiration, resentment, all tangled into one. Daniel had been benched for 2 games in a row. He didn't talk about it. He just came home, slammed the fridge, locked himself in his room, and told me to stop asking. But I couldn't stop. So I showed up to practice one afternoon and asked Coach Blake if we could talk. He looked me up and down once, not disrespectfully, just intentionally. He nodded toward the locker room. "Give me 10 minutes. We talked near the bleachers. I told him I was worried about my son, that I knew he wasn't playing well, but being benched wasn't helping. He didn't interrupt, just listened. When I stopped, he said, "I know what I'm doing. He'll earn his spot when he wants it. I'm just asking for 1 game," I said. "1 chance." Coach Blake tilted his head. "Are you asking me as a parent or as something else?" I blinked. "What does that mean?" He smiled. "It means there's always a way to negotiate, but some trades are more private." I should have walked away. Instead, I said, "Tell me what you want." That Friday, Daniel started. Played a full game. He wasn't great, still off his rhythm, but he ran like he had something to prove. After the game, Coach Blake asked me to stay behind. Everyone else left. The lights shut off one by one until only the hallway light outside the locker room glowed. He walked up to me slowly. "You did your part," I whispered. He didn't touch me. Didn't say anything. Just leaned close enough for his breath to hit my collarbone. Then turned and walked away. I stood there for 10 minutes before moving. Daniel started playing regularly again. I told myself it was because of his effort, because he tried harder. But deep down, I knew better. Coach Blake didn't ask for anything at first. He just kept me close. Called me Mrs. T with a smirk. Sent short texts late at night, updates about Daniel, but always with a tone I couldn't ignore. Then he invited me to his office. Said he needed to talk about Daniel's upcoming match. I brought iced coffee. Told my husband I was dropping off cleats. Blake closed the door behind me. Locked it. He didn't touch me. Not yet. But he stood close. Too close. He leaned in. "You want him to stay in the game?" I nodded. "Then you need to make sure I stay interested." Not that day. But the seed had been planted, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Daniel started improving. Faster. Sharper. But then something changed. Coach's daughter, Emily, started coming to practices. She was 17. Sharp-tongued. Pretty. She noticed Daniel before I did. One day after practice, I saw them talking near the car. She laughed too hard. He looked awkward. That night, he ignored dinner. Next week, he missed his mark in the game. Coach Blake noticed. So did I. He texted me, "We need to meet." We met in the gym storage room. Sweat, rubber mats, old equipment. The smell was overwhelming. So was the silence. He pulled the door shut, then turned to me. "You're losing him again." "I know." He stepped closer. "Do you want to keep him focused?" "Yes." "Then give him less reason to look elsewhere." I knew what he meant. That night, I went home. My husband asked what was wrong. I said I had a headache. I stayed up, staring at Blake's message, then typed, "When and where?" He invited me to the school kitchen. Said he'd be locking up late after team dinner. I arrived at 9:40. Empty halls. Echoing footsteps. He was already there. Just a t-shirt and track pants. Music playing from his phone. Hungry? He asked. I shook my head. He walked up to me, lifted my hand, and placed it on his chest. Then let's feed something else. The counters were cold. The air was electric. And when we were done, it was like nothing had ever existed before that moment. Daniel played the best game of his life the next day. My husband cheered from the stands. I chewed my lip raw. Emily started showing up more. She posted a photo with Daniel, nothing scandalous, but enough to raise eyebrows. He started skipping practice. Blake texted, "You need to handle this." I didn't know how. I asked Daniel about Emily. He said she was just cool. I told him to focus. He rolled his eyes. The next game, he played poorly again. Blake benched him. I stormed into his office. "You said." He cut me off. I said I'd keep him on if you kept me satisfied. He stood. "So, are you done?" I stared at him and shook my head. The next week, we met again. This time in the field house. Empty. Rain outside. Steam inside. Afterward, he pulled me close. "I could fall for you," he whispered. I pulled away. "Don't." Daniel made the starting lineup again. Emily sat beside him at lunch. My husband started asking questions. I deflected, until I couldn't. Final game of the season. Crowd roaring. Daniel on the field. I sat between Blake and my husband. Mark was tense. Watching me. Watching Daniel. And then, the whistle blew. Daniel scored. People screamed. Blake squeezed my knee. Mark stood up. Walked to the field. And when the players started jogging in, he didn't stop at Daniel. He walked straight to the ref. Grabbed the mic. And said, "My wife so our son could play. Ask them." Dead silence. I stood frozen. The crowd gasped. Daniel turned, eyes wide. "And Blake?" He just smiled. The silence after my husband's announcement was deafening. People stared. The ref lowered the mic slowly. Parents shifted uncomfortably in the bleachers. Daniel stood in the middle of the field, frozen like someone had yanked the breath from his lungs. Blake didn't move. I couldn't look at Mark. I couldn't look at anyone. I walked off the bleachers slowly, like my legs weren't my own. Daniel tried to run up to me, but Blake caught him by the shoulder. "Let her go." He said it calmly, like it was nothing. Like this was all expected. That night at home, the house was split into silence and rage. Daniel locked himself in his room. I heard things breaking inside. Mark was gone. He left without a word. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the tile. My phone buzzed every few seconds. Notifications. Messages. Photos. Someone had filmed it. The mic drop. The scream. The shock. By morning, it was on a local high school gossip blog. By noon, it was on Facebook. And by evening, it was everywhere. Coach Blake was suspended. Temporarily, they said. Until further review. He messaged me that night. "They'll forget. Don't panic." I didn't respond. Because for the first time since this started, I was terrified. Daniel didn't speak to me for 2 days. When he did, it was only one question. "Is it true?" I nodded. Tears fell. He didn't flinch. He just turned and walked away. Mark returned to the house 3 days later, not to talk, not to reconcile, just to get clothes. He didn't look at me. I asked him to stay. He said, "You made your trades. Now live with the cost." Blake showed up on my porch a week later. He had a duffel bag in one hand, coffee in the other, and that same smug smirk. "You okay?" he asked. "No." He nodded. "You want me to come in?" I shook my head. He raised an eyebrow. "What's the plan then?" "I don't know," I whispered. He laughed. "That's the problem, Natalie. You never knew what you wanted, except attention." I slammed the door. School board meetings. Investigations. Parents demanded accountability. Daniel quit the team. Blake resigned. Rumors swirled. Some blamed him. Some blamed me. But no one really cared about the truth. They only cared about the scandal. Months passed. Mark filed for divorce. Daniel moved in with his uncle for a while. The house was quiet, hollow, and I just sat. I stopped checking my phone, stopped cooking, stopped pretending. One night, Daniel came home. Unexpected. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself, just dropped his bag by the door. "I'm not here to talk," he said. "Okay. I'm not here to forgive you either." "Okay. I just need time and space." "But this is still my home." I nodded. That night, we sat at the same table, ate in silence. And it was more comforting than anything Blake ever gave me. Blake texted once more. "You still think I was the problem?" I deleted it. The school hired a new coach. Strict. Cold. No drama. Daniel didn't rejoin the team. He started boxing instead. Said it helped with anger. One day, I found a letter on the kitchen table. Daniel's handwriting. Only one sentence. "You broke me for a game." I didn't reply, because he was right. I live quieter now. No phone buzzes. No games. No coaches. Just the echo of one decision. And the reminder that some trades cost more than the trophy.